I never thought jury duty could be a place where something unexpected might happen. Honestly, I was just dreading the whole thing. Stuck in a bland, overcrowded waiting room, flipping through outdated magazines, trying not to make eye contact with anyone. But then, somehow, it ended up just being the two of us. And yeah, the guy who sat down next to me didn't exactly pick the socially acceptable distance. It started on a Tuesday morning. I rolled out of bed, grabbed some coffee, and headed to the courthouse, half expecting an endless day of sitting in uncomfortable seats, watching people shuffle past like zombies, and wondering if I'd get picked for some boring trial about a parking ticket or a noise complaint. The waiting room was that typical courthouse kind of place: flaky laminate floors, peeling paint, and that distinct smell of dry cleaners mixed with old paper. You know the vibe. When I clocked in, there were maybe a dozen people sprawled out, each doing their best to disappear into their phones or books. I found a seat near the back and settled in, already planning how I'd zone out for the next several hours. But then, one by one, people got called to the judge's chambers or the courtroom, and the room slowly emptied. Minutes turned into an hour, and suddenly, I was looking at a nearly empty waiting room, with just one other guy left. The moment he walked in, something about him caught my attention. Not in a cheesy, love-at-first-sight way. More like, wait, who is this guy, and why is he suddenly the only other person here? He wasn't what I expected from the usual courthouse crowd. He looked like he skipped all the stress and just showed up wearing a crisp, dark jacket over a plain white t-shirt, his hair tousled, but in a way that looked intentional, not messy. He gave this half smile as he scanned for a seat and, without hesitation, came over and sat right next to me. Right next to me. Like, bordering on too close. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not one of those people who freak out about personal space. But this felt different. It wasn't crowded or anything. There were a few empty chairs between us, and yet he plopped down in the one right beside me. No small gap, no polite buffer, just shoulder to shoulder. I glanced over at him, trying to figure out if I'd offended him by sitting too far away, or if he was just being friendly or oblivious. He caught my eye and shrugged with this easy, casual grin like, "What? It's fine." His eyes were a warm brown, and there was this calm confidence about him that made me suddenly aware of how quiet the whole room had become. Like everything outside had muted itself and left us in a bubble. We didn't say anything right away, just sat there, side by side, the clock ticking louder than usual. I kept stealing glances, wondering what his story was. Was he nervous? Was he used to this kind of thing? Or was he like me, just trying to get through the day without making a scene? Then, almost like he read my thoughts, he broke the silence. "First time at jury duty?" He sounded casual, but there was something in his voice that made me want to lean in and hear more. "Yeah," I said, trying to keep it light. "You?" "Second," he replied, nodding. Not much better than the first, but I guess it's one of those things we all have to do. That's when I realized that, for once, jury duty wasn't the worst part of my day. Because sitting there next to this guy, this unexpected stranger who somehow felt like more than just a passing acquaintance, it suddenly felt like maybe, just maybe, this day wasn't going to please me after all. And that's when the judge's assistant called our names. Just the two of us. We exchanged quick looks, that brief moment when you realize you're actually going to be stuck together for a while. The courtroom was surprisingly small. Just a plain room with a few rows of chairs and a judge's bench that looked way too high off the ground. The clerk motioned for us to follow, and the rest of the day started feeling a little less anonymous. They led us to a side room where the lawyer explained the basics of the case. It was nothing dramatic, a dispute between two neighbors over a fence line, but they needed a jury anyway. I wasn't expecting it to be exciting, but that's when I realized something. The guy's name was Matt. When he introduced himself, his smile was easy, like he wasn't taking any of this too seriously. We sat down next to each other in the jury box, and I couldn't help but notice how comfortably he settled in, like this was all just part of his routine. "You must be a frequent flyer," I joked quietly. He laughed, low and genuine. "I wish. Just once before. But hey, maybe I'm the lucky charm for a short trial." I smirked, trying to keep it casual, but inside I was curious. What did he do? Was he a lawyer? A teacher? Or just a guy who happened to look out of place in a courthouse? During the questioning, we were mostly silent, but every now and then, Matt would lean a little closer and whisper a comment about something the lawyers said. He had this way of explaining things that made the dry legal stuff sound almost interesting. I found myself paying more attention just to hear what he'd say next. At one point, there was a break, and we were back in the waiting area, still the only two of us left. Matt pulled out a notebook and started sketching something. Just doodles. Nothing fancy, but I could see he was focused. I asked him about it and he shrugged. Just something to keep busy. I'm an architect. Helps me think. That explained the neat lines and the way his hand moved with purpose. An architect? That's pretty cool, I said, genuinely impressed. I'm in marketing. Definitely less creative. He grinned. I don't know. Marketing's all about creativity, too. Selling stories, right? We fell into an easy rhythm, talking about work, favorite shows, even the weird quirks of the courthouse. There was something about talking to Matt that felt natural, like we'd known each other longer than an hour or so. Maybe it was the way he looked at me when he laughed, or how he'd lean just a bit closer when he wanted to make a point. It wasn't pushy, just comfortable. As the afternoon dragged on, the tension in the courtroom started to wear on me, but every time I caught Matt's eye, I felt a little lighter. There was this quiet understanding between us, like we were both in on a secret that the rest of the world didn't get. When the judge finally dismissed us for the day, I was surprised to find I didn't want to leave. Matt stood up, stretched, and looked over at me with that same easy smile. Dinner? He said, like it was the most normal thing in the world. I hesitated for a second, feeling that familiar knot of nervousness in my stomach. Jury duty wasn't supposed to lead to dinner plans. But then I thought, why not? This day had already been way more interesting than I expected. Yeah, I said, trying to sound casual, though my heart was ticking up a notch. Dinner sounds good. We walked out of the courthouse together, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe fate, or whatever you want to call it, was sneaking a little surprise into an otherwise boring Tuesday. As we headed toward a nearby cafe, Matt slipped his hand just a bit closer to mine. Not quite touching, but close enough that I noticed. And damn, that small, almost accidental contact might have been the best part of the whole day. The cafe wasn't far, just a couple of blocks down a narrow street that felt a little quieter than the rest of the city. It was one of those small, cozy spots with exposed brick walls and the smell of fresh coffee hanging in the air. Nothing fancy, but perfect for a conversation that felt like it had the potential to stretch for hours. We snagged a corner table, the kind tucked away so you don't feel like the whole place is watching you. Matt ordered a cappuccino, and I went for a black coffee, trying to keep my voice steady even though my mind was doing cartwheels. The day had flipped so quickly from, jury duty to, maybe this guy could actually be someone I want to know. I found myself watching him as he sipped his drink, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, and the subtle hesitation before he spoke sometimes, like he was weighing his words carefully. There was a vulnerability there, beneath the easy confidence, that made me want to reach out and learn more. So, architecture, I said, picking up the thread from earlier. What got you into that? Matt leaned back, fingers wrapped around his cup. I've always loved building things, not just physically, but creating spaces where people feel something. Comfort, inspiration, safety. My grandfather was a carpenter, and I guess I wanted to keep that lineage going, but with a twist. That made me smile. Sounds like you have a lot of heart for it. He nodded. Yeah, I do. It's more than just lines on paper. It's about people's lives. There was a pause, and then I found myself sharing a bit about my own job, how marketing was sometimes about crafting stories that connected with people, even if it felt superficial at times. It was strange, but with Matt, I felt like I could be honest without worrying about judgment. We talked about music, favorite movies, and the weird little things that made life feel less mundane. Somewhere between a debate over the best pizza toppings and a shared frustration about traffic, I realized I hadn't felt this relaxed with someone in a long time. There was something magnetic about the way Matt listened, really listened, like my words mattered. At one point, he looked up, his eyes catching mine, and said quietly, "You know, I was kind of hoping we'd end up being the only two on jury duty. I don't know. I guess I was hoping for an excuse to talk to someone interesting. I blinked, caught off guard, but not in a bad way. Interesting, huh? You think I'm interesting? A slow smile spread across his face. Yeah, you're different than the usual crowd. That hit me in a way I wasn't expecting. I guess I'd always played it safe, kept my guard up, especially when it came to meeting new people. But there was something about Matt that chipped away at that wall without even trying. The sun started dipping lower outside, casting a warm glow through the cafe windows. Neither of us looked like we were in a rush to leave. There was an easy silence between us, comfortable and full of possibility. Then, out of nowhere, Matt reached across the table and lightly brushed his hand against mine. Not a big gesture, but enough to make my heart jump. I didn't pull away. Somehow, it felt right. Sorry, he said softly. I don't want this day to end. Neither did I. We stayed there for a while longer, talking quietly, occasionally stealing glances that felt like small confessions. When we finally stepped outside, the city lights were starting to flicker on, and the night air was cool but inviting. We walked side by side, and this time, Matt's hand found mine again. No hesitation, no awkwardness. Just two people who had stumbled into something unexpected and didn't want to let go. I don't know what the next day at jury duty would bring, or if we'd even get called back. But in that moment, with his hand in mine and the city humming softly around us, it felt like maybe this was the start of something worth holding on to. We didn't say much as we walked back toward the courthouse after dinner, the city's usual buzz feeling oddly distant, like we were wrapped in our own little bubble. The streetlights cast long shadows, and every now and then, Matt's fingers tightened around mine just a bit. Small, electric reminders that this was real, not just some random courthouse encounter. When we reached the entrance, the reality of the next day's jury duty settled back in like a cold wind. I hesitated at the door, suddenly unsure how to say goodbye without sounding awkward, or like I wanted more than just a casual, "See you later." Matt must have sensed it, because he stopped and turned to face me fully. "Hey," he said, voice low. If you want, maybe we can grab coffee before court tomorrow? I could use a reason to feel less bored." I laughed nervously but nodded. "Yeah, I'd like that." He grinned, that same easy smile that had been making my chest feel tight all evening. "Good. It's a date then." The word hung between us, light but charged with something neither of us wanted to name just yet. The next morning, I showed up early, coffee in hand, trying to play it cool, even though my stomach was doing backflips. Matt was already there, sitting on a bench near the entrance, looking like he owned the place. I waved, and he stood up, pulling me into a quick hug that caught me completely off guard. "Morning," he said, breath warm against my ear. "Morning," I replied, my voice a little shaky. We found a small cafe nearby that wasn't as busy as yesterday's spot. This time, there was less small talk and more comfortable silences, like we were settling into something familiar. I told him about my sister's annoying dog, and he shared a story about his first architecture project, a tiny cabin in the woods that had nearly driven him insane. As the court called us back inside, I realized I didn't want the day to end. But the trial dragged on, and the monotony started creeping back in. Still, having Matt beside me made it bearable. We passed notes under the table. Little jokes, doodles, random observations. It felt like we had our own secret language. During a break, Matt surprised me by pulling me aside near the courthouse steps. "I know this sounds crazy," he started, "but do you want to go for a walk after this? Just, get out of all this legal stuff for a bit?" I didn't have to think twice. Absolutely. We wandered through a nearby park, the kind with winding paths and tall trees that filtered the afternoon sun. We talked about everything and nothing. Past relationships, childhood memories, dreams neither of us had told many people about. There was a softness to those moments, like we were letting each other in, slow and careful. At one point, Matt stopped and looked at me seriously. "I'm glad I sat next to you that first day," he said. I never expected jury duty to be the start of, something. Me neither, I admitted. "It's kind of crazy how things just work out sometimes," he smiled, stepping a little closer. Crazy, but good crazy. Our hands found each other again, fingers intertwining like they belonged. And in that quiet space, with leaves rustling around us and the sun dipping lower, it felt like the beginning of something neither of us wanted to rush but couldn't wait to explore. When the trial finally wrapped up a couple of days later, I realized that the whole experience had changed for me. Jury duty wasn't just a tedious obligation anymore. It was the day I met someone who made me want to show up, not just in court, but in life. Matt and I kept seeing each other after that, starting with more coffee dates, walks in the park, and late-night talks that stretched into the early hours. We joked about how awkward it was that a courthouse had brought us together, but honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way. Looking back, I guess all I needed was someone willing to sit a little too close, and the courage to let them in. A few weeks passed, and what started as casual coffees and walks became something that felt, well, a little more real. We weren't just two guys who happened to be the last at jury duty anymore. We were making plans, sharing playlists, and slipping into each other's lives in this way that felt both exciting and terrifying at the same time. One Saturday, Matt invited me over to his apartment to check out some of the projects he'd been working on. I hadn't been to his place yet, and I was curious. Architects tend to have a certain aesthetic, right? I expected minimalism, or maybe a gallery-worthy space. What I found instead was warm and lived in, like a home someone actually loved, not just a showpiece. He gave me a tour, pointing out sketches pinned to the walls, models on shelves, and a stack of books that looked well-thumbed. There was a guitar in the corner and a half-finished cup of coffee on the coffee table, which made the whole place feel real, like a snapshot of who he was when no one was watching. We ended up sitting on the couch, and for a while, we just talked. About everything and nothing. The kind of conversation where you lose track of time, and the world outside fades away. At some point, Matt reached over and took my hand again, this time not just brushing but holding it gently, like he was anchoring himself to me. "I've been thinking," he said softly, "about how lucky I feel to have met you that day in jury duty. It feels like a lifetime ago, but also like yesterday." I smiled, feeling that familiar warmth spread through my chest. Yeah, funny how the worst day at the courthouse turned out to be one of the best days of my life. He laughed, then looked at me with this intensity that made my breath catch. "I don't want to be just someone you hang out with. I want to be more, if you want that too." I swallowed hard. It wasn't that I hadn't thought about it. I had. But putting it into words made it all feel real, vulnerable. "I want that," I said. "More." That night, when I left his place, I felt like I was walking on air. The city streets seemed brighter somehow, every noise a little sweeter. We texted each other until late, sharing silly jokes and random thoughts, the kind of connection that felt like it was only just beginning. But as with anything new, there were moments of uncertainty. A few days later, I caught myself hesitating when Matt asked if I'd come over after work. I was worried about moving too fast, about the vulnerability that came with opening up. Was I ready to let someone in like this? Could I handle it if things didn't work out? Matt noticed the change, of course. One evening, as we sat on his balcony watching the city lights twinkle, he asked, "You've been quiet lately. What's on your mind?" I took a deep breath and tried to explain the jumble of nerves and hopes and fears swirling inside me. He listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he reached over and squeezed my hand. "Hey," he said, "we don't have to rush. We can take it one day at a time. I'm here." That simple reassurance meant more than I could say. It was a reminder that this wasn't just some fleeting thing, but something worth being cautious about, because it mattered. Over the next few weeks, we settled into a rhythm that felt good. Lazy Sunday mornings with breakfast in bed, late-night talks that stretched until dawn, and quiet moments where words weren't even necessary. It wasn't perfect. There were misunderstandings and moments of doubt, but there was always that underlying connection pulling us back together. One evening, walking home after dinner, Matt stopped and pulled me close. "I know we haven't been together that long," he said, eyes searching mine, "but I want you to meet my family. I want you to be a part of my life. The thought made my heart race. Meeting family was a big step, a sign that this was no longer just a casual thing. I nodded, trying to steady my voice. I'd like that. I'd like that a lot. That night, lying in bed, I thought back to that first day at jury duty, the awkward closeness, the unexpected conversation, the way a dull day turned into the beginning of something I never saw coming. It was funny how life worked sometimes. I didn't know what the future held. But with Matt by my side, I felt ready to find out. Meeting Matt's family was something I'd been both looking forward to and nervously avoiding in the days leading up to it. It felt like a milestone, a clear sign that this wasn't just a whim or a fun distraction, but something real and tangible. Of course, that made me overthink it way more than necessary. What if they didn't like me? Or worse, what if Matt's parents had those classic, "So when are you settling down?" questions waiting? Matt, on the other hand, was surprisingly chill about the whole thing. He told me not to stress, joked that his family was pretty laid back, and assured me it was just a casual dinner at his parents' house. Still, as I stood outside his apartment on the day of the dinner, my palms were sweating. When Matt greeted me at the door, all my nerves melted away, replaced by the warmth of his smile. "Ready?" he asked, slipping his hand into mine. "Ready as I'll ever be," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. We took a short drive to a cozy house in a quiet neighborhood, one of those places where you immediately feel like you're stepping into someone's story. His mom opened the door before we could even knock, her smile bright and welcoming. "Matt, you're late!" "And this must be the guy you've been texting nonstop." I laughed, relieved by how easygoing she was. "Hi, I'm really glad to finally meet you." His dad was right behind her, holding a tray of something that smelled delicious. He greeted me with a firm handshake and a teasing, "So you're the one keeping my son distracted from work." Dinner was a warm, laughter-filled affair. Matt's parents weren't the typical stuffy, formal types. Instead, they asked questions about my job, my family, even my favorite guilty pleasure TV shows. Matt squeezed my hand under the table a few times, those quiet moments between us grounding me. After dinner, we sat in the living room with mugs of coffee and a record player softly spinning in the background. Matt's mom showed me old photo albums filled with images of Matt as a kid. Grinning with a missing front tooth, goofing around with cousins, building Lego castles. Seeing that side of him made me realize how much I wanted to be part of that story, part of his life beyond the coffee dates and walks in the park. Later, as we drove back to the city, Matt reached over and rested his hand on my knee. "So, thoughts?" he asked. I smiled, feeling a mix of happiness and something deeper. "Your family's great. You're lucky." He looked over, that familiar grin lighting up his face. "Yeah, guess I'm the lucky one." That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about how far we'd come, from awkward strangers cramped in a courthouse waiting room to something that felt like love. It wasn't perfect or fairy tale smooth, but it was ours. In the weeks that followed, we settled into a rhythm that felt natural. We explored new parts of the city, trying hole-in-the-wall restaurants and wandering through art galleries. I learned that Matt had a dry, sarcastic sense of humor that caught me off guard, and he discovered I was surprisingly competitive at board games. One rainy evening, we found ourselves stuck in his apartment, the sound of raindrops against the window creating a cozy backdrop. We cooked dinner together, him chopping vegetables with the precision of a surgeon, me accidentally dropping too much garlic into the pan. Between bites and laughter, Matt looked at me, eyes soft. "I'm really glad you came to jury duty that day," he said. I chuckled. "Me too. I almost skipped it." He grinned. "And I almost didn't sit next to you." "Thank God you didn't." It felt like a moment suspended in time, a quiet acknowledgement of how serendipity plays into life in the most unexpected ways. But as with all things worth holding on to, there were moments when reality crept in. Work got busy for both of us, and the time we spent together started to shrink. I found myself missing those easy conversations and the small gestures, like his hand finding mine during a movie or the way his eyes lit up when he talked about his projects. One evening, I caught myself scrolling through my phone, hesitating before texting him. I wondered if the distance was just a temporary thing, or if it was starting to pull us apart. When Matt finally called later that night, exhaustion clear in his voice, I knew I had to be honest. "Hey, I miss you," I said without thinking. There was a pause on the other end before he replied, "I miss you too. Sorry I've been MIA lately. Work's been insane." We talked for a while, sharing the stresses and small victories. It wasn't a perfect fix, but it reminded me that we were still in it together, even when life got messy. Sometimes love doesn't come wrapped in grand gestures or perfect timing. It shows up in quiet moments, in the willingness to keep trying, to stay connected even when it's hard. And with Matt, I was willing to keep showing up, one day at a time. After that call, things didn't magically become perfect overnight. But there was a shift, a quiet understanding that even when life got hectic, we were still a team. We started carving out little pockets of time for each other, whether it was a quick coffee between meetings or a shared playlist to listen to during long commutes. It wasn't always grand or sweeping, but it was real. One evening, a few months after that first awkward jury duty meeting, Matt invited me over again. This time there was no pressure, no big plans, just a simple night in. We cooked dinner together, the kitchen filled with the familiar smells of garlic and herbs, and laughter spilling over as we fumbled through the recipe. Afterward, we settled on the couch, close, but not rushing anything. The city lights twinkled outside the window, soft and steady, like a quiet promise that whatever came next, we'd figure it out together. Matt turned to me, his eyes steady and warm. "You know," he said, "I never imagined jury duty would lead me here. To this. But I'm really glad it did." I smiled, heartful. "Me too." "It's funny how life sneaks up on you like that." He reached out, his fingers finding mine with that same gentle certainty from the start. "I'm not great with words, but what I'm trying to say is, I want to keep doing this, whatever this is, with you." There was no grand declaration, no dramatic confessions, just two people, sitting side by side, choosing each other in the quiet moments. I squeezed his hand, feeling everything I wanted to say settle comfortably inside me. "I want that too." And in that simple exchange, all the awkward beginnings, the nervous texts, the late-night talks and stolen glances, they all made sense. Because sometimes love isn't about fireworks or perfect timing. It's about the slow, steady moments where someone sits a little too close and never quite lets go. As we leaned into each other that night, I realized that day at jury duty wasn't just a chance encounter. It was the start of something real, something worth the risk. And honestly, I wouldn't have had it any other way.